Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross was on Capitol Hill yesterday. Did you meet with him, and what did he have to say about the process going forward?
Yes, he's given us a little bit of information concerning the hope that we can get this done by the end of the year. I feel that's kind of ambitious, and I didn't like the idea that later on yesterday, after we had met with him, that a letter went to only the Republican representatives in the Senate and the House about what the plan was and how to get this through. I think Secretary Ross has done a great job trying to keep this in a bipartisan fashion, particularly before the trade representative comes on board. Of course, he hasn't been confirmed yet. But yesterday was a little disconcerting when that letter went to just the Republican side of the fence. I hope that this is going to be a bipartisan effort. Otherwise, there are going to be a lot of problems.
I looked at your white paper on what Democrats could do when it comes to trade, and a point that you make is that Congress hasn't been as involved in trade policy as perhaps you'd like Congress to be. Do you see that changing? Of course, the White House would have to notify you, give you 90 days notice if they're going to reopen the NAFTA talks. Are you optimistic there's going to be a good quality of dialogue between the Congress and the White House?
Well, David, we've had 3 meetings with Secretary Ross, which is very, very important, very important to the process itself, because we want to be, as you know, under Article 1, Section 8, the Congress has a part to play, no question about it, in negotiations, and not after the fact. This is what the main problem was in last year in terms of getting anything done on the trade agreement with the 11 countries throughout the world. You got to have us involved in the very beginning. It avoids a lot of problems. You know what we're thinking. That's why I put out this principles of trade. I think that should be applicable, whether you're talking about the environment, whether you're talking about jobs, whether you're talking about working conditions, or one of the main subjects we've been discussing, and that's currency, and who is going to enforce it so that you have a trade agreement that can be depended upon and trusted.
When you're back home in Patterson talking to constituents there, what do they tell you about their notions of trade and maybe how that notion has changed since the election, since we saw what happened with the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
Well, I think the general population, even in Patterson, New Jersey, my hometown, and I've lived there all my life, no question in my mind, that people feel that we put the brakes on these trade agreements that seem to be sliding through without any real debate or discussion as to how it impacts American jobs. That's the main concern of us that we have right now, David. I hope that's the president's main concern, that it's not wishful thinking or talking. That doesn't mean we set out to hurt our partners in trade. And in the question of NAFTA, we're talking about Mexico, we're talking about Canada. We want to be able to make this an agreement together so that it's easier to enforce. If you put the rules down when everybody understands them, it's good. And as I said, we go back to those qualities before. Environment, labor, currency, origin of where the product comes from. And I think that we really screwed up badly on the South Korean trade deal. I hope we can go forward into a new venue. That depends on bipartisanship. Yesterday, we had it in the morning and we lost it in the afternoon.
Let me ask you a bit about tax reform. Of course, tax issues also purview of your committee, the House Ways and Means Committee, and
yes,
the chairman of that, spearheading the creation of this blueprint on tax reform. How open are you and your Democratic colleagues on that committee to tax reform generally, and what do you want to see in any legislation that comes about?
We will not vote for anything that doesn't include not only Wall Street, but also Main Street. We're not going to make the mistakes, hopefully, that we made in 2000 and 2003. And although that wasn't tax reform per se, we did do a lot to incur injury on the broad spectrum of the American economy and finances. We're not going to make that mistake, the mistake that was made. Otherwise, you're not going to have any of our votes.
We talked about the timetable here for changes to trade policy. How about the timetable for tax reform? What are you hearing from Chairman Brady about when he'd like to get moving on this?
If you want to do this in a comprehensive fashion, it's going to take a year. It's going to take bipartisan input. When Congressman Camp, who has since left the Congress from Michigan, was the leader, was our chairman in Ways and Means. We started out for 4 or 5 months. We had bipartisan meetings together. We had 11 hearings. I was on taxes and real estate tax. The chairman of that committee was Mr. Johnson from Texas. I was the ranking member on that committee. We had 11 hearings. After the hearings, we made our report. And after the report, we went partisan. The Democrats were nowhere to be found. I don't think that's the only reason why we never got to ground zero and voted on it, but I think it was a darn good reason. We shouldn't make that mistake, whether we're talking about trade or whether we're talking about tax reform, which I think will be on agenda. I think there's some common ground we can work on. But I said, no help for the middle class, then we're not voting on any give-backs to those folks who don't need the tax cut in the first place. We made a mistake in 2001 and 2003, David. The numbers show it. It led to what happened in 2007 and 2008. Let's not be foolish again.